The sound of shattering glass echoed through the barn as Penelope Hayes stood frozen, her white wedding dress catching the golden light of lanterns, while her groom's departing silhouette disappeared into the Texas dusk of 1875. "Looks like Samuel Thornton couldn't handle a proper commitment after all," someone whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Penelope's chest tightened as the murmurs rippled through the crowd gathered at the Willow Creek barn dance. This was meant to be her wedding celebration, the dancing meant to follow their vows exchanged earlier that afternoon. Now her new husband was gone, having announced to everyone that he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Before storming out, the music had stopped. 50 pairs of eyes stared at her with pity, judgment, or morbid curiosity. Her mother sobbed quietly in the corner while her father had already stormed out, presumably to hunt Samuel down. "Well," she said, her voice cracking slightly as she smoothed down the simple white dress she'd spent months saving for. "I believe we still have a celebration to attend." Nobody moved. The fiddler looked uncertainly at the banjo player. The whispers grew louder. "Madam," a deep voice called from across the room. Penelope turned to see a tall man step forward from the shadows. She recognized him vaguely, Quinn Irwin, one of the cowboys who worked at the Broken Spur Ranch north of town. He wasn't from Willow Creek originally. Rumor had it he'd ridden in from Colorado about a year ago. Quinn approached with a steady stride, his boots marking a deliberate rhythm against the wooden floor. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his Sunday best, while simple, was clean and pressed. He stopped before her and removed his hat. "May I have this dance?" he asked, extending his hand. The room held its breath. Penelope stared at his outstretched hand, then at his face. His eyes held no pity, only warmth and perhaps a hint of challenge. "You may," she answered, placing her trembling fingers in his palm. Quinn nodded to the musicians. After a moment's hesitation, the fiddler drew his bow across the strings and the music began again. Quinn led Penelope to the center of the floor, placed one hand respectfully at her waist, and began to lead her in a gentle two-step. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, acutely aware of everyone watching. "I know," he replied. "But I've been wanting to dance with you since I first saw you in town last spring. Figured this might be my only chance." His honesty startled her. "You don't mind dancing with a woman who's just been abandoned at her own wedding celebration?" "I mind that someone would be fool enough to abandon you at all," Quinn said, guiding her through a turn. "But their foolishness shouldn't rob you of your dance." As they moved across the floor, others slowly began to join them. Her best friend Martha and her husband, the blacksmith and his wife, even the preacher and his daughter. Life returned to the barn as the music played on. Quinn didn't leave her side. When one song ended, he asked for another, and another. Each time with the same respectful bow, the same steady gaze that seemed to say he'd stand there all night if she'd let him. "You should dance with someone else," Penelope said after their fourth dance together. "People will talk. Let them," Quinn replied with a small smile. "Besides, it's your celebration. You should dance with whoever you want. And if I want to keep dancing with you," something flickered in his eyes, "then I'm the luckiest man in this barn." As midnight approached, many guests had departed, offering awkward condolences or simply slipping away. But the core of the community remained, determined not to let the evening end in complete disaster. The music continued, and Quinn remained at Penelope's side, dancing every dance, fetching her punch, standing tall beside her when well-meaning neighbors offered their sympathies. "Why are you being so kind?" she asked during a momentary break when they stood near the open barn doors, the cool night air a relief from the heat of the dance. Quinn looked out at the stars. "My ma taught me that true character is revealed in how you treat someone who can offer you nothing in return. And what do you think I can't offer you, Mr. Irwin?" He turned to her, his expression serious. "Right now, your heart is broken and your pride is wounded. You don't owe anyone anything tonight, least of all me." Before she could respond, the fiddler called out for the last dance. Quinn offered his hand once more. "Would you do me the honor?" Penelope took his hand, surprised to realize she was smiling for the first time in hours. "The honor is mine." They danced until the last note faded away. As the remaining guests gathered their belongings, Quinn escorted Penelope to where her mother waited. "Thank you," Penelope said quietly. "I'll see you home," he replied, not a question but a statement of fact. That won't be necessary. My mother, please, he interrupted. Allow me this. In the end, he drove their wagon with Penelope and her mother seated beside him. The night was quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl and the steady clop of hooves against the dirt road. When they reached the Hayes family farm, Quinn helped both women down from the wagon. Mr. Irwin, Mrs. Hayes said, her voice hoarse from crying, would you care to join us for Sunday supper tomorrow? It's the least we can offer after your kindness tonight. Quinn glanced at Penelope. Only if Miss Hayes doesn't object. I don't, she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Then I'll be here after church, he said with a nod. That night, Penelope lay awake, her wedding dress hung in the corner of her room, a painful reminder of the day's humiliation. Yet when she closed her eyes, it wasn't Samuel's rejection she remembered, but the steady pressure of Quinn's hand on hers, guiding her across the floor as if nothing else mattered. True to his word, Quinn appeared at their door the following afternoon, hat in hand, and a small bunch of wildflowers extended toward Penelope. These aren't much, he said, but they reminded me of you. The yellow and purple blooms were simple but beautiful against the backdrop of their white farmhouse. They're perfect, she replied, accepting them with a smile that felt less forced than she had expected. Sunday dinner was an awkward affair, with the empty space where Samuel should have been looming large. But Quinn filled the silence with stories of his time working cattle drives, of the mountains in Colorado where he'd grown up, and of his dreams to one day have a place of his own. What brought you to Texas? Penelope's father asked, speaking more than he had since the previous day's disaster. Change of scenery, Quinn answered, and they say opportunity lies in new territories. Hard to find opportunity without capital, Mr. Hayes observed. Yes, sir. That's why I've been saving every penny. The broken spur pays fair wages. After dinner, Quinn asked Penelope if she might show him the orchard her family had mentioned. Away from the watchful eyes of her parents, they walked among the apple trees just beginning to blossom. I wanted to ask you something, Quinn said after they had walked in comfortable silence, but I fear it might be too soon. Penelope's heart skipped. What is it? There's another dance in town next Saturday, nothing fancy, just the monthly gathering at Simmons' place. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Would you consider attending with me? She hesitated. People will talk. They're already talking, he said gently. Question is, do you care more about what they say or about what might make you happy? Penelope looked up at him, this man who had quite literally saved her from complete humiliation just one day ago. I'll go with you, she said. But not because I don't care what people say. I do care. I care that they'll see I'm not broken by what Samuel did. Quinn smiled, and it transformed his entire face. That's the spirit, Miss Hayes. The following Saturday arrived with clear skies and a warm breeze. Penelope chose her blue dress, not her finest, but one that made her eyes look brighter and had always garnered compliments. When Quinn arrived to escort her, his appreciative gaze confirmed she'd chosen well. The Simmons barn was less crowded than her wedding celebration had been, but still well attended. As they entered, conversations faltered and heads turned. Penelope felt her resolve wavering. We can leave if you want, Quinn whispered, his hand steady at the small of her back. She straightened her shoulders. No, I believe you promised me a dance, Mr. Irwin. His smile was worth every curious stare. That I did, Miss Hayes. Once again, they took to the floor, and once again, Quinn didn't leave her side the entire evening. This time, however, there was a lightness between them. She found herself laughing at his observations, enjoying the way his hand felt in hers, noticing the subtle scent of soap and leather that seemed to surround him. Thank you, she said as they paused for refreshments. For what? For making me feel normal again. His expression softened. You were never anything but extraordinary, Penelope. Some folks just can't recognize what's right in front of them. The use of her first name sent a pleasant shiver through her. I think you might be a bit biased, Quinn. Maybe, he admitted, but I'm also right. As spring turned to summer, Saturdays became their ritual. Quinn would arrive at the Hayes farm, sometimes bringing small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, fresh berries he'd picked, once even a book of poetry he'd traded for in town. They would attend whatever social gathering was happening, or sometimes simply take a ride to the creek for a picnic if Penelope wasn't in the mood for crowds. Through it all, he never pushed, never presumed. Each dance was requested with the same respect as the first. Each touch was careful, deliberate. And slowly, the whispers about poor Penelope Hayes faded, replaced by speculation about that handsome couple. One evening in late July, they sat on the Hayes front porch, watching fireflies blink in the gathering dusk. Quinn had helped her father repair a broken fence that day and had stayed for supper afterward. "I've been offered a job," he said suddenly. Penelope turned to him, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. "Where?" "Here, actually. Old man Jenkins is selling his property north of town. The new owner, a businessman from Austin, needs a foreman to run it while he stays in the city." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," she said, relief washing through her. Quinn nodded. "It comes with the small cabin on the east side of the property. Nothing fancy but solid walls and a good roof." He paused, his fingers fidgeting with the brim of his hat. "It's meant for a family, though." Penelope's heart began to race. "Is it now?" "It is." He set his hat aside and took her hand. "Penelope, I know it hasn't been that long since." "Well, since everything happened, and I wouldn't blame you if you weren't ready, but I need you to know that I've fallen in love with you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Penelope found herself unable to speak, overwhelmed by the intensity of his gaze and the emotions his words stirred within her. "You don't have to say anything now," Quinn continued. "I just wanted you to know where I stand, where I've stood since that first night, if I'm being completely honest." Penelope squeezed his hand. "I think I fell in love with you that night too," she whispered. "I just wasn't ready to admit it to myself." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. "Does that mean?" "It means I love you too, Quinn Irwin." He moved closer, his eyes asking permission. When she nodded, he leaned in and kissed her gently, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek as if she were made of porcelain. When they broke apart, both a little breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably speak with your father." "Probably," she agreed with a smile. "Though I think he might suspect your intentions. He did mention at supper that you'd make a fine addition to any family." Quinn laughed softly. "Subtle man, your father." 2 weeks later, with her parents' blessing secured, Quinn knelt before her in the same orchard where he'd first asked her to dance with him after her failed wedding. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said, holding out a simple gold band. "But I promise you this, I will dance with you through every joy and sorrow life brings us. I will stand beside you every day and night for as long as I live. Penelope Hayes, will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Their wedding was held in early September, a simple ceremony in the town church, followed by a celebration at where else the community barn. This time, when Penelope entered in her wedding dress, a new one sewn by her mother and Martha, her groom waited faithfully at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked toward him. And when the dancing began afterward, Quinn took her hand just as he had that first night. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Irwin?" he asked with a smile that still made her heart skip. "You may have every dance," she replied, "tonight and every night after." True to her word, they danced until the lanterns burned low, surrounded by friends and family who had witnessed their journey from that first night of heartbreak to this evening of joy. As they prepared to leave for their new home, Martha embraced Penelope tightly. "Who would have thought," she whispered, "that being abandoned at a barn dance would lead to the greatest love story Willow Creek has ever seen?" Penelope looked over at Quinn, who was loading their wedding gifts into the wagon. "Sometimes," she said with a smile, "the worst moments lead us exactly where we need to be." Their cabin, as Quinn had said, was small but sturdy. He carried her across the threshold despite her laughing protests, setting her down in the main room where a fire already burned in the hearth, started earlier by one of his friends from the ranch. "Welcome home," he said, suddenly looking nervous. "I know it's not much compared to your parents' farm," but she silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect. It's ours." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered new ways to dance together, learning each other's rhythms in the intimate darkness of their bedroom. Penelope found herself thanking the stars that Samuel had left, that Quinn had stepped forward, that life had led her here to this man who cherished her so completely. The following months brought both challenges and joys. Learning to run a household together, Quinn's long hours establishing himself as foreman, occasional visits from well-meaning but sometimes overbearing parents. But through it all, they maintained their ritual of dancing. Sometimes it was formal, at town gatherings. Other times it was just the two of them in their small living room, Quinn humming a tune while they swayed together after supper. On particularly difficult days, when tensions ran high or disappointments weighed heavy, one would simply extend a hand to the other, an invitation to set aside harsh words or frustrations and remember the foundation of their love. When spring arrived again, bringing with it the anniversary of their first meeting, Quinn surprised Penelope with a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, untying the string. "Open it and see." Inside was a beautiful dress, deep green with delicate embroidery around the collar and cuffs. "Quinn, it's lovely, but we can't afford." "We can," he interrupted gently. "The ranch is doing well. We've set aside enough for the future, and I wanted you to have something special for tonight." "Tonight," he grinned. "I may have arranged a small gathering at the Willow Creek barn, sort of an anniversary celebration." "You didn't," she exclaimed, but she was already holding the dress up to herself, admiring the way the color complemented her auburn hair. "I did. 1 year ago today, I danced with the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and somehow convinced her to keep dancing with me." He pulled her close. "Seemed worth celebrating." The barn had been transformed with fresh flowers and ribbons. It seemed the entire town had turned out, eager to celebrate the couple whose love story had become something of a local legend. As they entered, the crowd parted, and the fiddler began to play the same song that had accompanied their first dance 1 year earlier. Quinn bowed formally, extending his hand just as he had then. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Irwin?" Penelope curtsied in return. "Always, Mr. Irwin." They moved across the floor with the easy grace of two people who had learned to anticipate each other's movements, to flow together as naturally as breathing. The gathered crowd watched with smiles and sighs, witnessing the tangible love between them. Later, as they stood catching their breath near the refreshment table, the town's eldest resident, Mrs. Abigail Foster, approached them. "I've seen many loves come and go in my 80 years, she said, her voice cracking with age, "but few as genuine as yours. You know how I can tell." "How's that, Mrs. Foster?" Quinn asked politely. "It's in how you dance," she said with a knowing smile. "Some couples dance to be seen, others dance because it's expected. But you two, you dance like there's no one else in the room, like the music was made just for you." Penelope felt her cheeks warm at the observation. "Thank you, Mrs. Foster." The old woman patted her hand. "Cherish it, my dear. A love that makes you want to dance through life's hardships is rare indeed." As summer approached, Penelope discovered she was expecting their first child. Quinn's reaction dropping to his knees, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach, and then looking up at her with eyes shining with tears was something she knew she would remember all her days. "Do you think we'll still be able to dance?" she asked one evening as they sat on their porch, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "Of course," he replied without hesitation. "We might need to adjust our steps a bit, but I promised you every dance, remember? That includes the ones where we're learning to be parents." True to his word, even as her pregnancy progressed, Quinn found ways for them to continue their ritual. Sometimes it was just gentle swaying in their kitchen. Sometimes it was sitting on the porch swing, his arm around her as they moved back and forth in rhythm with the crickets' evening chorus. Their daughter was born in the early hours of a January morning in 1877, arriving with a lusty cry that immediately captured both their hearts. They named her Emma Grace Irwin, and Quinn declared her the second most beautiful girl in Texas, with a wink at his exhausted but radiant wife. 2 weeks later, when Penelope came into the bedroom after washing up for the night, she found Quinn walking slowly around the room, tiny Emma cradled against his chest, his lips moving in a silent melody. "Teaching her to dance already?" Penelope asked softly. Quinn looked up with a smile. "Never too early to learn. Besides, she couldn't sleep. And what song are you teaching our daughter?" "The one they played the night we met." He extended one hand toward Penelope. "Care to join us?" And so they danced, the three of them, a family created from what might have been disaster, moving in slow circles around the bedroom of their small cabin. Emma eventually drifted to sleep against her father's chest, but still they danced, celebrating in their quiet way the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever wonder," Penelope asked as they finally laid Emma in her cradle, "what would have happened if Samuel hadn't left that night?" Quinn considered the question carefully. "I'd like to think I would have found my way to you eventually," he said, "but I'm grateful I didn't have to wait." "As am I," she replied, leaning into his embrace, "though I admit sometimes I think I should send him a thank-you note." Quinn laughed softly. Now that would set the town talking again. As the years passed, their family grew. Emma was joined by a brother, James, and later by another sister, Charlotte. The small cabin expanded along with their family, with Quinn adding rooms as needed, always making sure to include a space large enough for dancing. The ranch prospered under Quinn's management, eventually leading to an opportunity to purchase it when the owner decided to invest elsewhere. It was a risk that required everything they had saved, but they took it together, turning the Broken Arrow Ranch into a legacy they could pass to their children. Through it all, the lean years and the prosperous ones, the births of their children and the passing of Penelope's father, the droughts and the bountiful harvests, they maintained their tradition of dancing. Sometimes it was at formal occasions in town. Sometimes it was teaching their children the steps in their living room on rainy afternoons. Sometimes it was just the two of them, gray beginning to streak their hair, moving together under the stars on their anniversary. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Penelope asked on their 20th anniversary as they swayed together on the porch of the main ranch house they had built 10 years earlier. "I said many things," Quinn replied, his hand still fitting perfectly at the small of her back. "Which part are you recalling?" "You said you'd been wanting to dance with me since you first saw me in town, and you figured that might be your only chance." He smiled at the memory. "I did say that, and I meant it. I never imagined you'd agree to a second dance, let alone a lifetime of them." "I'm glad you took the chance," she said, resting her head against his chest, still solid and strong despite the passing years. "As am I, my love, as am I." In 1905, 30 years after that fateful night at the barn dance, Willow Creek celebrated its centennial. As part of the festivities, the town organized a grand dance in the same barn where so many community gatherings had been held over the decades. Quinn and Penelope, now respected elders of the community, arrived to find the place decorated with photographs and mementos celebrating the town's history. Among them was a faded photograph taken at their wedding, showing them in their first dance as husband and wife. "Look at us," Penelope said with a smile, touching the image gently. "So young." "You haven't changed a bit," Quinn replied, the familiar warmth in his eyes belying the gray of his hair and the lines etched into his face by sun and laughter. "Flatterer," she accused fondly. "Truth-teller," he corrected. When the music began, Quinn extended his hand just as he had that very first night. Though they moved more slowly now, their steps were no less in sync, their connection no less powerful than it had been when they were young. Their children and grandchildren watched from the edges of the dance floor, smiling at the obvious love still evident between them. Little Emma, now a mother herself, leaned toward her husband. "Papa has danced with Mama every Saturday night for 30 years, she said, "through everything. He says it's how they remember who they are together." Later, as the evening drew to a close, the town mayor called for attention. "We have something special planned to end tonight's celebration," he announced. 30 years ago, a young woman was abandoned at a barn dance much like this one. A cowboy stepped forward and danced with her until morning. That dance led to one of the greatest love stories our town has witnessed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people turned to look at Quinn and Penelope. "Quinn and Penelope Irwin," the mayor continued, "would you honor us with one final dance tonight, the same song that played that first evening?" As the familiar melody began, Quinn led Penelope to the center of the floor. The crowd drew back, forming a circle around them. For a moment, they stood looking at each other, communicating silently as only those who have loved deeply for decades can do. Then Quinn bowed formally, a twinkle in his eye. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Irwin?" Penelope curtsied in return, the movement as graceful as her aging body would allow. "You may have every dance, Mr. Irwin," she replied, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed barn, "tonight and every night after." And as they began to move together, the years seemed to fall away. They weren't the respected ranch owners, parents of 3, grandparents of 8. They were once again the abandoned bride and the cowboy who had stepped forward when she needed him most, finding in each other a love worth dancing for every night for all their days.